everyone, welcome to Soundcastle Book Club. I'm Hannah, co-founder of Soundcastle and also a musician working mainly in mental health settings and with young families. We're delighted to have the wonderful Dave Camlin with us today, also a musician, and within the banner of that, he's a researcher, a teacher, a performer. What else? He does lots of work in community settings, just wonderful all-round person. We're very happy to have with us.
It's very lovely to be here, Hannah. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, thanks, Dave. And really the reason this book club exists is to invite wonderful people like you along into our Soundcastle community with the aim of demystifying some of the language around academic research, connecting it back to the reality of our working lives as musicians in the community, and really using the wonderful research that exists out there to enhance our practice as a whole sector. So we're really using these videos to get other people involved who haven't had the chance to connect much with academic research. So I think for everyone watching today, it could be really useful for them to just hear a little bit of a brief background of yourself and your working life, just to set the scene for us.
I mean, it's probably worth saying actually for people from the outset that I don't have an academic background really at all. My kind of whole way into music was through very informal practices. You know, I'm a folkie really at heart. And I got into community music when I was kind of in a gigging band, and we were doing band work with young people. So that was my first way in. Was getting involved with band work, you know, quite a long time ago now. And then I got involved with Sage Gateshead, and we developed a traineeship and then a community music degree at Sage Gateshead. So as part of that, I kind of found myself with more responsibility for looking at, you know, for training people who wanted to be community musicians as well, and realised that I didn't have the knowledge to be able to like do that properly. So I needed to develop that. So it's not that I've come from some kind of formal academic training. I realised that actually developing an academic side to my practice as a musician makes me a better musician and makes me a better teacher as well. So all of this came from there, and a lot of what I've been trying to do in research terms is trying to find academic ways of expressing things that I think we know as practitioners. And I think that's where there are gaps in knowledge in the academy, if you want to think of it like that, you know, where if people have come through more formal routes, the world of community music, of participatory music, is this kind of foreign thing that they're trying to make sense of and understand. Whereas I think people that have come through as practitioners, they absolutely understand that world implicitly, but it's sometimes not easy to then translate that knowledge into something that's more academic. It can feel a bit disempowering. But I think, you know, I really encourage people to explore the, you know, the academy still has resources. Whereas in community music world, we're always strapped against policy. You know, we get dependent. Now it's health and well-being. Yeah. 15 years ago, it was social impact. We're tied to policy in terms of how we do the work. The work's always been the same, but you realise that the academy has got resources that aren't subject to the same limitations as those kind of policy restraints. So that's part of it. It's trying to think, how do we get some of those resources to be able to develop the work that we know is needed.
Yeah, really, really important thoughts. Thank you, Dave. And I want to bring us straight on to this latest work.
You're just going to have to shut me up, Hannah.
Just got a little eye on the clock. But it's all really, really important stuff. And this connection between our practice and being able to express it through research and being able to communicate it on many different levels is so important. So I want to bring us to the study that we're going to look at today, which was carried out by yourself, Helena, Daffern and Katherine Zeserson. And we're looking at group singing as a resource for the development of a healthy public, a study of adult group singing. And I would love it if you could give us a little mini summary presentation of what this work is.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. I mean, it's important to know it took a long time to get this through peer review. This was a project that started in 2018, and then it took us, like, I think 5 different rounds of peer review to get it through into publication. So the people and it's in Nature, which is great because it's open access and it's really great journal to have it in. And they kept on coming back to us saying, no, we really like it, but we think you need to change this. And 5 different rounds of peer review was quite
that's heavy going.
Hard work to kind of keep yourself motivated to do it. So it's taken a lot of work, but we're really proud of the state that it ended up. So let me just, if I can share my screen.
Yes.
I think I can, hopefully, I can show you some stuff. So, I mean, the first thing to do is maybe just to demystify some of the ideas that are in there. I mean, I think what I'm really excited about with this particular paper is this, for the first time, we really kind of get to set out the notion that music is what we refer to as an adaptive complex. So it's made, it's a complex system. So some people who kind of know other things I've written about will know that I have this kind of model of music in 3 dimensions. That if you think of it as a musical level, music has this aesthetic dimension where we're performing works. And so for people that have come through a formal musical training, that's often really familiar. That's what music is about, is the performance of works. But within the participatory dimension of music is about the performance of relationships. So that's, and I think community musicians and people working in participatory settings know this, but it's not that participatory settings are always just about the performance of relationships, and and concert halls are always just about the performance of works. They're on a continual creative tension between the two, and it's the power of those 2 dimensions that leads to these benefits. So this kind of sunburst effect that's going on, these are all the paramusical benefits that arise. And one of the theories that we're kind of suggesting in the paper is actually it's when these 2 dimensions are held in a good creative tension that more of these benefits emerge. So from an aesthetic point of view, from a more formal point of view, when people feel that they can be involved and and it means something to them, and it's of more benefit. And from a participatory setting, when the quality of the music is really strong as well, that leads to these benefits. Unfortunately, it kind of was borne out in the data. So this project,
can you help us to understand, Dave?
Go on.
We've got this sort of binary relationship between the aesthetic performing works and the participatory sort of relationships, musical activity. What leads to this paramusical? Can you help us to understand this?
I mean, I think
paramusical.
I first developed this. My thinking around this first developed when I was teaching undergraduates, because I came in from a community music background. I always kind of assumed, actually, you've got all if it's this duality, you've got this tension between aesthetic and participatory, but actually the participatory has got all the good stuff in it. So when people get all the well-being benefits from participating in music, it's the act of doing. David Elliott talks about music as is procedural in essence. You get benefits from it from doing it, not just listening to it. So I was kind of, my background as a community musician was this is why you want to involve people in music, because they'll get these well-being benefits from it. But then some of the students that I was working with says, well, hang on a minute, but I think of myself as an orchestral musician, and I don't imagine that when I'm performing that people are receiving what I'm performing completely neutrally. I want them to be completely transformed by it. So if I'm performing, or if I'm listening to a fantastic orchestral performance, I want to be moved and inspired and feel some kind of sense of transcendence with it. So it was that realization for me that actually, of course, that's true. However we are as musicians, that's what we're always intending. We always want our music to have an effect beyond merely just being a good musical experience. So there are always, if there were no paramusical benefits, if there was nothing that came off it, and these paramusical benefits, we kind of understand them in loads of really complex ways now. So lots of good research about it can improve well-being. It can there's a spiritual dimension. It can increase our mood. It can help us energize or relax. It can distract us, as well as all of this. There's a whole load of really great research evidence around what music is actually good for in research terms at an individual level, but then also at a social level, and also at a cultural level. Music is always about performing aspects of culture that might mean something to us. If we're singing one of our favourites, you know, the songs that we remember from the 1950s when we were in a care home, it means something, that it's that song. That song means something to us because it's that, you know, it's that particular thing.
Yes.
If there was none of that, then music wouldn't have any of, really wouldn't have any of its potency. It would, I imagine it would probably just kind of, it would disappear. It's the fact that we get more from it. We get these really transcendental moments from it, but we get it from both dimensions. So you can get it from purely from listening to fantastic music played well in a concert hall, and we can get it purely from participating in something where there is no audience at all, where it's just all of us here now in this room together making music together. So and my experience is that most music falls somewhere between these two. You know, we're always, and especially as community musicians, we're always moving between these two dimensions. We start a group that is conceived initially just as a fun thing to get people out of the house and have fun, but very quickly, you know, people are going, well, who could we share this with, you know? So people are we're always being drawn towards, pulled between these two dimensions, and the theory is that it's because when we harness these two dimensions, it enhances the benefits that we feel from it.
Beautiful. Thanks, Dave. That was such a great description of it.
So the project itself, the research itself was we were on a project in 2018 called the Fellowship of Hill and Wind and Sunshine. This was a project for the National Trust that was commemorating the 75th, is that right? 75th anniversary of the 100th anniversary, the centenary of the end of the First World War. And one of the things that happened in Cumbria at the end of the First World War is that a group of mountaineers who had lost comrades in the First World War raised money after the First World War, and with the money that they raised, they bought mountains. They bought loads of mountains in the Lake District, so mountain summits in the Lake District, which they then gave to the nation. So the Fell Rock and Climbing Club based in Keswick raised enough money to buy like 15 mountains and gave these to the nation as a war memorial. And the story isn't really known. People don't realise that a lot of these summits, you know, Scarfell Pike is one, Great Gable, Green Gable, loads of these well-known summits are actually war memorials.
I had no idea.
Yeah, no, people, it's a fantastic story, but it's not a story that's particularly well known. So the National Trust had commissioned me as a musician to make a song cycle. So we had 3 weekends in 2018 where this is a photo from one of the weekends. We got like groups of like 50 to 60 singers each time to kind of go up onto mountains and sing this cycle of songs that are kind of arranged on top of the mountain. Oh no, it was beautiful. On top of the mountains that had been given to the nation by these mountaineers. And we were, one of the songs, I made an arrangement of the words. So in 1921, a mountaineer poet called Geoffrey Winthrop Young gave the dedication on top of Great Gable, where they made this gift. And I turned the words of that dedication into a choral piece. So we sang the words of the dedication in the place where the dedication was made, you know, nearly 100 years later, it was really quite profound. So the project then, I'll skip the video, but there is a video out there. I'm going to skip.
Maybe we can put a link to it.
I'll tell you what, I'll give you a link to the Prezi Hannah as well. You can explore it. I think you know, I like visual ways of trying to understand things as well. So the academic stuff, to get it into that journal, it's pretty dense, and we've had to be really we've had to fillet it and really refine it. So and I know it's a bit dense, but I think sometimes visuals help to unpack it. So we approached it as a piece of research with 3 distinct phases to it. So the first phase was what we're referring to as a distributed ethnography. So and we didn't end up being able to call it a distributed ethnography in the paper because one of the peer reviewers disagreed with our use of the term ethnography. So SenseMaker, which is the tool that we used, they refer to it as a distributed ethnography, but I think in the paper we call it distributed data generation and interpretation. It's a bit more complex. Distributed ethnography just means it's like it's an ethnography, but it's collecting stories. It's a story-based approach. So it's a tool to collect people's stories. And then what the second part of it was we got people together, having shared their stories. We then gave them all copies of everybody's stories to read, and then we got a group of about a dozen people together to just discuss all of the different stories and think about what were the themes that were coming out of those stories.
And when you say stories, are they stories based on their experience of singing in a group together?
Yeah, actually, let me. If I show you the process, the third bit, then which I'll explain. Two of the people that took part in the theming workshop also worked in therapeutic settings, and there were some things that emerged in the theming workshop that were to do with this experience of relationship, how people were experiencing relationship, and when people talked about these kind of really transcendental moments, that what they were experiencing was this deep connection with other people. So I was really interested to explore actually is how similar or different is this to the experience that people working in therapeutic settings have of the therapeutic relationship. So when people talk about transference, counter-transference, the importance of relationship in these therapeutic contexts, is it similar? Is it different? So that was essentially the three layers. So this first bit, the distributed ethnography, this is what people did. I'm just going to skip through some of this. People that present. So when they participated, they got sent a link to this app. So the app asks you 3 questions. So and literally tell a story. So tell a story about what influenced your decision to not participate in group singing. And we did this with people who'd been on the fellowship project, and we also used it with people who hadn't participated in the project. So we had like a group to compare it with as well.
Yeah.
Or fast forward to a time in the future where you have to teach a younger person a lesson in the value of group singing. What experience would you share? Or you're being interviewed by the local media after singing in a group in a recent event. What would you say? So it's really open. The questions are really open. Just tell us a story. And we're not trying to capture a rehearsed narrative. It isn't write an essay, or it's like when you come back after having had a brilliant musical experience, and you come in the house and you close the door and you find your kids or your partner or your parents. What is it that you tell them, while you're putting the kettle on and you meet your flatmates? What do you tell them that you've just done? So it's trying to capture something in its rawest sense. Then the second part of the process is then that we ask people then to interpret the story that they just told against a set of predetermined categories. And some of these categories are drawn from the literature. Some of them are drawn from the wider. SenseMaker is an international network of researchers, and some of the same frameworks are used on different projects, so that it's possible to compare the results of your project with ones from others. So it was things like, I have a stronger sense of who I am. I feel a sense of brotherhood, sisterhood with others in the group. I feel a stronger connection to the world around me. And a lot of these ways of interpreting are using triangles to do it. So it's not just choose one or the other. It's like there's a lot in the article about the use of, we call it ternary form. So the use of triangular thinking as a way of getting more into the complexity of something. And it's the same with the music in 3 dimensions. If you just have to choose between aesthetic and participatory, then that's where we get all these dichotomies of like, is it about process, or is it about product, or is it about excellence, or is it about access? And those debates, they don't really help us to move forward. And I think if you just get stuck in them and they're not useful. Yeah. So this kind of triangular thinking is then weighing up what's the relative, significance of all of these things. So as soon as we've got 3 points to think about, then we start to think much more carefully about the experience that we've just had. I won't go through all of these. I'll skip through them.
But it's great to give us an idea of how you engaged in the research.
Yeah, I'm conscious of time, and people can explore this. And I'm happy to, if people want to kind of get back to me and have questions, I'm really happy to to kind of talk about it as well.
Wonderful.
So these are the kind of things that we found when we asked people questions about belonging, that people are, universally and this is for the fellowship and the non-fellowship group, both everybody talked about this sense of feeling a sense of brotherhood, sisterhood, so this sense of connection. But what surprised us when we were asking people, because for the National Trust, they were really, we were all really expecting that people would want to talk about the connection to, the stronger connection to the world around me.
Yes.
Because actually we're doing these amazing things in the natural environment. But actually there wasn't much difference at all between the fellowship and the non-fellowship. But actually, even on the fellowship, the thing that people were emphasizing was the connection to other people. So that helped us to make one of the theories that we've kind of developed off this. What this suggests is that this social bonding effect that happens in group music making, that happens in group singing, is actually we know that it's that it's true. There's loads of research out there to suggest that that's part of what makes it strong. But what was really interesting was that this is still true even when faced with when people are asked to weigh that up with the significance of doing something significant in these amazing outdoor environments.
And so just to double check, the fellowship of the group that went up the mountain.
Yeah, and the non-fellowship were the people that responded but that hadn't participated, that their experiences weren't about the fellowship project.
And so you were comparing these two experiences of singing, one in this dramatic landscape and one just, it could have been in a church hall or something.
Yeah, no, that's right, exactly. So for taken as in total, 75% of people who responded said it was about this sense of social connection. But when we looked at them separately, it was 78, because it was actually more in the fellowship. So we're emphasising the social connection.
Yeah.
Slightly less only slightly less in the non-fellowship group. So
does this mean that actually being in that incredible natural landscape, while it was wonderful and beautiful to have that as part of the experience, it didn't necessarily impact on the nature of the musical experience and the music?
Because we've collected all the stories, what people's stories seem to point towards was that actually they were using the land as a resource to facilitate the social connection. So the singing was the singing and the sense of connection with other people, and actually with people that weren't there. So there was a strong sense of connection with with the people that had been on that mountain 100 years ago, or the people that had given their lives so that for the freedom to walk the mountains. So there was that sense of connection as well that was maybe there. But it was very much actually we're using the resources, these natural resources, not as an end in themselves, but because they afford stronger social connection. So the experience was actually heightened by both of these things. And we found this. I'll skip through. There's loads of people's like fragments. I'll give you an example. These are just fragments of people's stories that that help to underpin what was going on.
I love that. You could almost physically get hold of the excitement.
And all of there were masses of shared looks, shared smiles, shared twinkles of eyes, hugely emotionally satisfying, and an end feeling like being snuggled in an enormous warm duvet. And these stories, we're so familiar with these. These are the kind of stories that people tell us about their experiences of making participatory music all the time. And so we can't lose sight of these things because they're pointing to something really kind of quite transcendental. People do experience these things as kind of magic moments. We'll come on to Mercedes Pavlicevich's sense of it. I won't go through all of those, but there's more. There are more examples in the paper, and there are links within the paper to more of the stories. Well, we found a similar thing when we asked people about was this experience good for your physical health, mental well-being, or spiritual sense, lifting you out of your everyday experience. And we know there's loads of research out there that suggests that singing is good for physical health. And there's lots of really good reasons out there, and especially but what we noticed, for every 98% of people who responded were saying that what was significant about the experience were either the spiritual or the mental, the emotional dimensions of the experience.
And
So
again,
even,
I love how you've presented it as a triangle, because it suggests that all three of these, the physical, the mental,
yeah,
the spiritual, that they are all interconnected, and
yeah,
they all sort of
yeah,
blend into one.
yeah.
Yeah.
And we know that people are getting physical benefits from group singing. So we know that people with COPD will improve their breathing capacity when they're singing together, because the whole process of breathing together is going to help improve lung function. And there's loads of good evidence out there to suggest that.
Yeah.
But from the point of view of the people experiencing it, that's not what their experience is on. Their experience is on their focus, their awareness is on the spiritual and the emotional dimensions of what they're involved with. And we think it's important to acknowledge that.
Yeah.
The literature and the research kind of points to these physical benefits, which are certainly there, but in people's experience, it's people don't necessarily sing together because it's going to improve my lung function, or because it's going to regulate my heart rate variability and improve my vagal tone. People are singing because they want the connection, they want these transcendental moments give you a lift, and can be profoundly spiritual, but they're much harder to measure.
Yes, and to articulate.
Really scientific terms, but that's I think that's the value of our approach, is considering we have to account for what do people themselves think is valuable about these experiences. When people talk about these experiences for themselves, what is it that they say?
Yeah.
And again, we found it was no different between the fellowship and the non-fellowship. So and we took people, these were long hikes. Some of this walking was like, these were all day hikes, 10 to 12 miles with 4,000 or 5,000 feet of ascent in them. But people weren't saying, I've done this epic walk and it was really good for my physical health. All of their stories they were saying, it's about the spiritual and emotional well-being. And actually, there's a nice phrase that somebody says in one of the focus group, where people say, well, actually, I was knackered at the end of the day, but it was a good price to pay for what we got from the day. So the physical benefits are the price that's worth paying to get this other stuff that's really the thing that you value. And the third one that we felt was significant was this one, where which was great for me, because it kind of really gives a visual correlate of that idea of what I mentioned at the start. That the paramusical benefits arise from the creative tension between these two musical dimensions. Making a good sound for other people to listen to, having fun making music together. When those two dimensions are activated and active, then that's what seems to be appearing here. We get there's this beam of significance that appears in the data as people kind of experience these paramusical benefits. But the fact that there's this kind of beam here kind of suggests that it's people recognise that it's both of these dimensions that are important. That they both need to be emphasised. And it was similar between the fellowship and the non-fellowship.
I find that really fascinating, that despite that dramatic shift in background scenery, there wasn't too much of there were still so many similarities between the two groups.
Yeah. And I think that's probably one of the strongest things we think that came out of the research, is that some of the things that we know about group singing, or that we think we know about group singing, really are constant, even when under under very different circumstances to singing every week in the village hall or whatever.
Yeah.
That they are they withstand these other influences, and that's what makes them really strong.
I mean, this is such a fascinating study, and I know there is so much more to it. So I'm going to encourage everyone watching to click on the link. I'll put the link below the YouTube video so that people can access it, and to really dive into it. But I was wondering, just to sort of round up our session, Dave, could we kind of dive into this idea of the transcendental elements of the music making, the things that are harder to talk about?
Yeah.
There was one particular quote that I pulled out of the study, which I just thought was so interesting. Let me just find it. So it goes as follows. The way that participants talk about their experience perhaps points to a pre-linguistic mechanisms which go beyond the capacity of language to fully articulate, where the music itself is a form of communication that language cannot be a substitute for. Pavlishovich refers to these kinds of transcendental experiences as magic moments, where the group is in peak flow and the social musical improvisation seems to be known within and between all minds and bodies as one complex phenomenon. And as one respondent put it, singing with others takes me out of myself into another space. I felt my precious sense of self drifting away on a wave of harmony.
Yeah.
I'd love to just finish our discussion today by having a chat about, you know, what does this look like? So many of us find it so hard to articulate these magical musical moments. And in your study, you use beautiful language such as self-other merging and interpersonal resonance. I'd love to just explore some of this and connect it back to the reality on the ground for those of us working in community contexts.
Great, let's do that. I mean, I think it comes back to that stuff we were saying at the start about music being an adaptive complex. I think what we mean by that is that there are lots of things going on all at the same time. So I've heard Daisy Fancourt say now that, you know, there are over 600 mechanisms implicated within music making. I need to follow that one. But, you know, but she's there's, I think current research is kind of suggesting, you know, the complexity of music making is ridiculous. There are so many things that are activated when it's going on. And I think what we're suggesting in the paper is that that it's an adaptive complex. And what we mean by that is each of these things affects the other. So, and actually, I think if I give you an example, I mean, my theorizing of this probably isn't as sophisticated, and well, I know it's not as sophisticated as the way that Daisy expresses it. But, if you imagine that, like, in terms of, if we think of mechanisms, this is part of what we're kind of suggesting in the paper, that there are at least three, you know, broad kind of sets of mechanisms that might be going on. There's the phenomenon of musical entrainment. So actually, when we, you know, just literally the act of entraining to each other, you know, I can tap my hands, even though we can't do it in Zoom. People at home, you know, who are watching this, we can all clap along with that. So at its very basic level, being able to entrain something internally to myself to something that's going on externally, at its simplest level, is what grounds, you know, what makes musical experience so fantastic.
Essentially a form of synchronization.
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, it survives in all cultures. So, like, when you and early years practitioners will be really familiar with this. You know, when the reason that we talk to babies, all cultures talk to babies in the same way, with through this motherese and this prosodic exchange, because it's basically about entrainment. It's about recognizing the rhythms and the you know and the pitch shifts that are going on within each other's expression. And it's this notion, and what's entangled with that, I think that's some of what we talk about in the paper. There's an entanglement that goes on with interpersonal neurobiology. So when we're engaged in these musical exchanges, actually what's happening is our neurobiology is becoming attuned to other people's neurobiology. So if you think about the dyad between parent and infant, when we're making music with each other, actually what we're doing is we're tuning into each other's world, and music is the way that we're actually feeling felt. That's there's an expression that comes from the world of interpersonal neurobiology. Dan Siegel talks about this notion of feeling felt. You know, when we recognize that we're having an experience and that someone else is also having the experience, and that what we're feeling is being echoed in what someone else is feeling. So the musical dimension of it becomes a metaphor for that. So these two things are being connected. When we're making music together, whether, you know, the theory is here, whether we like it or not, we're actually attuning to each other at a neurobiological level. I had a conversation with Dan Siegel about it, and because he says, you know, when we tune into each other's world, then some of our some of the things that we do naturally fall into alignment with each other. So if we feel connected to each other, some of our our breathing might synchronize with other people, or a whole range of other things will tune in. He says you can measure it using looking at the alpha and beta waves in the brain. And I said, so if you did it the other way round, if you were doing things that emphasized rhythmical entrainment or breathing, that would that then work the other way around, that would lead to this kind of neurobiological attunement? And he said, yes, absolutely, of course it would. If you're making music with people, then yeah, you would feel it, and moreover, you'd be able to measure it, because you could measure the alpha and beta wave synchronization. You can measure it through heart rate variability synchronization. You can see all of this that's going on. But the challenge is it's too complex. It's too complex to be able to measure. And the third bit of this is all of the neurohormonal stuff that's going on. We know that endorphins are probably implicated when we're making music together. There's also some theorists can suggest that oxytocin is as well. Dopamine is implicated even when we're listening to music. So all of these feel-good hormones that help us, that help improve well-being are closely interconnected as well. But the point is that it's all of these things are all happening at the same time. It's not that we can separate them. So there's a risk. If we've got 600 mechanisms to explore, we need to be understanding each of those mechanisms, but we also need to understand how do these mechanisms all work together, and what's the overall experience. And for a while, you start thinking, oh my God, to be able to do those experiments, you'd have to have, if you could trying to measure 600 mechanisms simultaneously and see how they all interact with each other. That's so complex. What kind of system would you have to be able to do that? When we tried measuring people's heart rate variability in another project where we were looking at virtual reality, the people in the choirs hated it. They were things, and they're having to stop singing every 10 minutes to do a questionnaire to be able to get to be able to fully understand what's going on. But it interfered with the experience of singing. Some people said, I'm not coming again next week if you're going to do that again, because it just really got in the way. Yeah. So if you're trying to measure 600 mechanisms simultaneously, authentically, in the moment when people are having these transcendental moments, then what kind of instrument would you need to be able to do that? And then of course you realize we've already got it. It's called the human body. It's called the human mind. We know when music is having these profound effects, when all of these things are firing off each other, and they're all connecting, because we feel it. And it goes beyond language. We can't put it into words because it's so complex. We can't say, oh yes, I think my oxytocin levels have just increased a little bit, or I'm getting an endorphin hit now, or my heart rate variability is, we can't express it in those terms, but we can feel it, and we do feel it. So whenever we talk to people about what's good about it, people use this language of magic, because that's the only language that we've got to be able to explain it. Whereas really what we're describing is something that's so complex that in order to understand it, we have to have people's actual experiences of it. And one of the points we make in the paper is, it's like, we weren't allowed to use the word phenomenology in the paper because a philosopher who reviewed it said, no, it's not phenomenology really, because it's not really phenomenological, because you're using predetermined categories. So we had to use experiential knowledge or something, I think.
I find it very interesting that for anybody watching who now goes and reads the paper and sees some of the people who are involved and some of the way they talk about these magical experiences, the language they use is always so poetic. And I think that's so fitting, because it needs a creative, artistic, metaphorical language. Absolutely. To put into words what can't be put into words.
Yeah. And it's not that it's, and our point is that it's not, it isn't fluff. It isn't, it's okay. It's just like woolly kind of nonsense magic language that doesn't actually help us understand anything. One of the things, I'm not sure whether we had to take it out in the final paper, one of the things I kind of say about it is like, you know, there's a more of a phenomenological approach is like a sniffer dog in research. It might not be able to do the digging, might not be able to do the heavy lifting, but it can show you exactly where you should be digging. So, you know, if we've got 600 mechanisms to explore and they're all interconnected with each other, what this kind of a more experiential understanding can really help us to know is actually what is really significant from the experience of people who have these experiences. And let's look there. Let's not look at all of these other possible places. Let's look at the places that people really talk about what makes it, what gives it its potency.
Yeah, which comes back to that part of your study where you were gathering stories.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's turning, you know, there's a joke amongst researchers, amongst scientific researchers, that the plural of story is not data. You know, they did, so the positivist community kind of dismiss individual experiences. It isn't data, but actually with SenseMaker, where we're able to kind of understand, you know, where people can self-signify, they can interpret the story themselves, we can start to create data. So that in this case, the plural of story really is data. It's given us something that we can look at and we compare. And obviously we need to do bigger studies, but it feels like it holds a lot of promise for understanding cultural value in the arts, because it's everything the AHRC have been saying for a while. You know, we can't understand cultural value unless we put the experience of people right at the heart of it. So hopefully the encouragement to come from this for people is to recognize, you know, that what goes on in your session where people are having these amazing experiences and they tell you about it, that is really, it's research gold dust. And we might not have had ways in the past of being able to frame that in academic terms, but I think these new digital technologies, digital methods will give us more opportunity to be able to turn people's experiences into really valuable research knowledge.
Wonderful. And I think on that hopeful, promising note, we're going to have to really unfortunately wrap things up, because I know there is so much more we could talk about on this. But I really want to hold on to that idea that it's worthwhile to be gathering the stories, and this kind of musical experience of tuning into each other's worlds that really stuck with me, of that sense of connection, that feeling that we can't put into words, is actually incredibly valuable, important stuff that we need to keep following and taking seriously, essentially. And I want to encourage everyone to go away, read the paper, click on the link, look at all of the amazing images and follow the story in more detail, because there's so much more to find out about this. But I just want to say a really big thank you to you, Dave, for presenting your work to us today. It's really
thanks for inviting me, Hannah. It's really proud and privileged to be involved, and I hope it's useful. You know, I hope it helps.
I think that's the understatement of the session. It's so incredibly useful, and we really appreciate your time. And for everyone watching, come and join us on the Soundcastle community. We'll be sharing Dave's paper there as well, and there'll be a chance to ask more questions, and we'll be around and can put you in touch with Dave if you want to find out more. But in the meantime, we'll see you all at next book club. Thank you, Dave.
Great, thanks, Hannah. Bye.
Bye.